Hello again, I'm Liam, and this is Office Hours with the Mad Professor. I was thinking about Donald Trump's economic policy and wondering who must be advising this guy. The talk he's been making about trade wars and how trade wars are so easy to win and that tariffs somehow make sense to him. I don't think he understands the position that the United States is actually in economically. We have a massive trade deficit because people don't want to buy what we make, and we don't make enough anymore. We are primarily a consumption-driven economy. We buy other people's stuff. It's just how it's been working out. If we want a better trade balance, he keeps saying Americans are getting screwed, we need a better deal with the world. Well, if we want a better deal with the world, we have to compete with the world. We have to actually produce things that people want. Right, and it's not even about the cost of labor. You get this sometimes in right-wing rhetoric. Well, we can't compete with low-wage workers in other countries because American workers are paid too much. Well, workers are paid more in quite a few other countries here, and they don't have our problem. I mean, the Germans export more than we do, and their wages are quite high. So it's clearly not the case. The issue here is, what do we make here that anyone wants? Right? As it is, we're primarily a services economy. We primarily export, innovations, financial services, that sort of thing. But if you really want raw numbers, you really need some manufacturing as well, some other goods to sell. And we just don't have any anymore, or not nearly enough to make up the kind of numbers that he's talking about. So, well, let's think about what he's trying to do here with tariffs and a trade war. Well, we export relatively little and import a lot more from places like China, right? Or to Europe. We have a trade imbalance with Europe as well. We import lots and lots of stuff. So we set some tariffs on goods coming in from those countries. What does that do? It raises the cost of those items to people in the U.S. It doesn't directly penalize those countries or those producers. If they sell stuff, they would still make the same amount of money. What it's supposed to do is it's supposed to affect demand. It's supposed to cut down the demand in the markets for particular goods. Well, that only works if you have an alternative good, right? Something that people can buy in its place. And if you start putting tariffs on goods that we don't actually manufacture or don't manufacture more cheaply than the tariffs would be, then it doesn't actually make a difference. People will continue to buy those goods, and those companies and countries would just make more money. They'd still be making the same. Well, they'd be making the same amount of money, and the state would make more. It would just cost more. That's the key issue. All it would do is cost more to the people, purchasing it in the U.S. I have a cat that just absolutely demands attention right now. So, if we raise the cost of things, who does that affect? Well, it affects American businesses. If you do it on a commodity like steel or aluminum, then it affects businesses in the U.S. that would use that commodity. It affects producers. It affects some of the actual few good manufacturing jobs we still have. So, if you raise the cost to American businesses of working with those materials, what does that do? Well, it risks American jobs. It risks lowering even more what we produce, because the cost would go up to those producers. If the cost goes up to those producers, why would they produce as? What's the point? Trump had a fit recently that in response to his tariffs on metals with the European Union, Harley-Davidson was going to move some of its manufacturing out of the country. And he's, they're betraying America, taking their jobs out of the country. Well, what do you expect? A sixth of their sales are to Europe. And if suddenly the cost goes up, right, to get them into the European markets and all that, I mean, if the Europeans raise tariffs on Harley-Davidson, which they did in response to the aluminium thing and the steel thing, if the Europeans are going to charge more to consumers in Europe to buy Harley Davidsons if they're made in the US, well, the logical thing for any company like that to do is to move those jobs out so they can hold that market share in Europe. They can keep selling it in Europe. Because if the cost of a Harley goes up too much in Europe, then people will just buy a BMW instead. And they've lost that market share. Which, of course, affects the American company that Trump is supposedly trying to help out, American companies, right? Well, why is he harming them with tariffs? That's what I don't get. Tariffs don't actually help anything in an economy like this. In an economy that's structured globally and built around consumption, tariffs only hurt you. The way to get around this sort of system here is to be able to compete within it. To compete within it, you need to innovate and you need to produce things that people want. Right? Setting tariffs just to raise the costs, all it does is it leads to reprisals. The Chinese are setting tariffs on American goods. The Europeans are setting tariffs on American goods. So the more he tries to set tariffs to save a few individual jobs, the more other jobs are going to get lost. This has been done repeatedly over the 20th century and into the 21st. Barack Obama used some tariffs. W. Bush used some tariffs. Every time that an American president passes any kind of tariff in modern history to save a few jobs in a given industry, it costs more in others. It has ripple effects. They don't work to save jobs. They simply don't. And there's a vast amount of evidence to support this. So who is advising this president? What is the point? Well, the point really isn't the economics at all. And I would argue that the point here really is to play with economic nationalism, to inspire nationalism overall, to turn people more against trade with other countries, to make it look like they're hurting us, and it supports the interests of this particular political movement, but that's all it really does. Because anything that goes wrong with it, they can just continue to point fingers, which is what he is very good at, deflecting blame onto other people. So it's not his economic policies that did it, it's those companies who betrayed America, so then you what? What are we gonna? Where's the end game here? Nationalizations? How are you going to rein in American corporations? You can't without actually directly attacking them in some way. Just wagging the finger isn't going to change their policies if the policy is actually logical and makes perfect business sense to do. And if the Chinese set tariffs on goods, the Europeans set tariffs on goods, well, what can that do? Well, you just point the fingers there. Those companies, those countries, those countries and all of their companies and whatnot, they're just screwing Americans. They're just harming you, and I'm looking out for you, da da da. And what do? You just continue to fuel that cycle of nationalism, which continues to accrue power for him. I do not think that Trump's economic nationalism and his tariffs are actually intended to have any real effect on the economy in any positive sense. And because if they are, then his economic advisors are complete morons. Because the historical record here is extremely clear. Tariffs have always ended up hurting things. Since the 1920s and 30s, by the time the United States had shifted over from a capital goods to a consumer goods market, to a consumer goods economy, it didn't work anymore. That's not really how things work. We've been in a global economy for well over a century. The late 19th century was in many ways arguably as globalized or more globalized than the contemporary world here, because there were fewer trade barriers, there were fewer restrictions, capital and goods and people flowed freely across borders all around the world. Today there are far more restrictions on what can move around than there were then. Things are faster today, but arguably no more globalized. We are stuck in a globalized economy, and within a globalized economy, where we've been for over a century, setting tariffs harms you unless you can compete in some realistic way, unless you can provide some kind of alternative. In the case of developing economies, they make a certain amount of sense. Not fully, but a certain amount of sense. So, for example, when Brazil set tariffs on the purchase of foreign jets, like the mid-range jets for wealthy Brazilians, that made a certain amount of sense to encourage sales of their own Embraer brand amongst the rich Brazilians. Of course, it had a very tiny effect overall because, guess what? Not many people bought jets overall. So it wasn't that big a deal, and it was an emerging economy, so it's not like it was as heavily involved overall in massive sales around the world and purchases around the world of mid-sized jets. For the American economy, we're in a completely different position here. The United States is a fully industrialized, fully developed country. It can't play those kind of games anymore. They worked, for the Europeans and the Americans way back when. It certainly worked for the Europeans in the 18th century. It doesn't really work anymore. So, realistically, the purpose here cannot be to save American jobs or improve the American economy for American workers. It simply doesn't. And that, of course, you can see that in their economic policies overall. Realistically, if you allow goods and capital to move internationally anyway, but you restrict labor to its country of origin, i.e. our immigration policies, all that does is actually harms workers. It keeps wages down. It raises cost for them. It does not do anything to actually help the worker, not in this kind of global economy. Everything about Trump's policies are not really designed to help the economy. If they are, these people are literally stupid. I don't think that they're that stupid. I think that they might, to some extent, believe their rhetoric, or some people might be sucked into it and believe the rhetoric, but certainly not the architects of it. They have to be smart enough to know that this doesn't work. Given that, it has to have some other political objective, and I think the key to that is understanding Trump's nationalism. And I'm going to come back to that theme, that topic, in later videos. It's something I'm going to be exploring probably a lot over the next year. We'll see. But it is an interesting topic, I think, and plays a big part in our contemporary American politics and, well, in perhaps forecasting where we're going as a society, where we're going as a country. So we'll come back to that another day. I have a cat that urgently needs attention, so I'm going to go give the cat attention. I will see you all next time. If you enjoy my little videos here, there's a subscribe button. Be sure to hit on that. Again, I'm Liam. I'll see you again sometime.